Hello friends, it's Nina and welcome back to my channel. Today we are going to be doing a wrap up for the books that I read in September. So this month, even as I was starting graduate school and I had my wedding in the middle of the month, I still managed to keep up pretty heavily with my reading. It helped that at the start of the month I was doing a readathon, and just the spooky season in general puts me in a good mood to read a lot. And because of that, I read 9 books this last month, which I think is the most I've read in a single month this entire year. For this video, instead of rating my books from the worst book I read to the highest rated book I read, I'm going to do it in reverse order. Mostly because in the past when I film these videos, I find that by starting out with the books I don't like as much, it kind of puts me in a bad mood, and I want to have a more positive energy when I'm recording these videos. So I think starting off with the books that I really enjoyed will help with that. So with that intro out of the way, let's get into the video. I had quite a few 5-star books that I read this last month, which was very encouraging for me that I'm actually picking up books that I enjoy. The first one of those is Abhorsen by Garth Nix. This is the third book in the Old Kingdom original trilogy. The main plot of this book follows the main characters from the previous book, Lyrael, who is Lyrael and Sam, and they are basically trying to stop this ancient evil from becoming free. Sam's best friend Nick is also possessed by this evil, so they're also trying to save his ass from unwittingly causing the end of the world. I really love Garth Nix's writing style. His books are very much like action, 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 and you're barely able to catch your breath. I think this book is a little bit more about plot over characters, but at the same time I really love the characters and the way they play off of each other. And if you're a sucker for animal companions in books, then honey, have I got something for you, because not only is there Mugget, who is a primordial being in the body of a sassy white cat, but you also have the disreputable dog, who is a primordial being in the form of a super loyal, steadfast man's best friend. The reason I really enjoyed this book was because I think a lot of the things I disliked in the previous book really fell away, and I was able to enjoy Sam and Lyrael as characters a lot more in this one. Since the books Lyrael and Abhorsen are kind of like a 2-for-1 deal in terms of the story, I think a lot of the themes from the previous book carry over here as well. Overall, it's a quest for finding your place in the world when you feel like you're a failure. Both Sam and Lyrael desperately feel out of place with the roles they were born into, and it's after some self-discovery and some plot points that they're able to really grow into the path they were supposed to follow. And that really comes from them not trying to be something that they're not, and instead focusing on what they're good at. Next book we're going to be talking about is Circe by Madeline Miller. This book tells the story of the witch Circe, who previously was a pretty minor character in the Odyssey. It's also a retelling, of the Telegony, which is the lost third part of the original epic cycle, which follows Circe's son Telegonus as well as Odysseus' son Telemachus. This story is very similar to the Song of Achilles in that it tells the full arc of Circe's life. Both her young, foolish love with Glaucus, then her meeting someone who can really match her very well with Odysseus, her love as a mother with Telegonus, and then finally her kind of retirement, softer love with Telemachus. One part of the story that I really love that kind of pushed it into the 5-star category with me was the section of Telegonus being born and then Circe dealing with him being a problem child and then him eventually growing up to being her partner. I really love parent-child relationships and dynamics in books, and I felt like this part was really beautiful and touching. I have to say I was really worried when I first heard about this book because I knew there was a scene of sexual assault in it, but it wasn't actually that explicit, and pretty much immediately after Circe gets kind of a really satisfying revenge on the men who attack her, so in the long run it didn't feel super triggering for me. Overall, the story has a very similar structure to Ariadne, but I will say that I think it's a little better than Ariadne because of the positive note that the story ends on. I feel like it has the perfect ending in very much the same way that the Song of Achilles ending is perfect. Just kind of this bright, hopeful field of possibility for what's to come. In talking about themes, the main one is, of course, the cruelty of the gods, which, shocker, which Greek retelling doesn't talk about that? I think this is the first one, though, that really focuses on the beauty of humanity and how, you only see the value in life if one day you're going to die, versus the gods who are very stagnant and, so devoid of life because they don't have the prospect of death. And this comes from the fact that Circe is an outsider kind of looking in on both groups, so she's able to give more perspective. The next 5-star book that we're going to be talking about is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. This story follows Richard, who is transferring to a new school and joins a very selective cohort of ancient Greek students. They're all very rich and very smart, and Richard is kind of dazzled by their glamour. But as the school year goes on, some drama unfolds that results in one of the members of the group being killed. Obviously, this book is kind of a staple in the dark academia genre, and obviously all the vibes are definitely there. The decor in Julian's office, the twins' apartment, and then Francis's weekend home really built dark academia in terms of both themes and aesthetic. I feel like this book does a good job of highlighting both what is alluring about academia but in higher education, but at the same time making fun of it, the more absurd, backwards things about it. Honestly, it might seem like a weird comparison, but this book really reminds me of Heathers the movie. It has the same dark humor in the way the characters talk about death and the murder that's committed. Speaking of humor, I thought that Bunny was absolutely hysterical. He's such a colossal asshole and is so absurd that you can't help but laugh. Although honestly, I think everyone is so fun and really interesting and has like an air about them that you can see why Richard is so attracted to the group. This book doesn't physically seem very big, but it's a 22-hour audiobook and it is thick. There's a lot of content in here. Honestly, even at halfway, I was like, how are we only halfway through this? I feel like I've gone to school with him at this point. It does drag a little bit at like the 75% mark, but honestly the last 10% of the book is just so intense and dramatic and has a really amazing ending. This book is chock full of themes that a lot of people have said you could probably write like a dissertation on just like one section of it. And I definitely think that's true. There's a lot of different things going on. I think one of the first ones that jumps out is this kind of fascination with brutality and the barbaric versus like the civilized and rational. And also the desire to kind of let go of thinking and move into feeling. This is basically the topic of the like seminar that Julian gives that we see in one of the early chapters. And I think it really represents Henry's character in particular. Like I said before, there's also a satire of college and people in positions of power. Julian is often seen as like the outlier as opposed to like the bumbling fools in the academic administration. And all the Greek students have a very much like holier than thou attitude compared to the rest of the student body. But at the same time, all of them are way more debaucherous than the rest of the college. Another major theme is showing like the difference between the self you present to people versus who you are deep down. I think Richard's realization of who his friends really are, in my opinion, kind of highlights a Japanese concept of tatamaya and hone. This probably has similar names in other cultures, but this is the one that I feel like is the most succinct. Tatamaya is basically how you act to fulfill societal expectations, whereas hone is how you actually feel. It's very much related to having a mask that you only drop around certain people. I think Richard thinks he's finally able to make it into the group to see the hone of his friends, but it's clear that he's pretty much always on the outside of the group, even at the very end of the novel. It seems like the only person he can get straight answers from is Francis, but I think that's also because Francis is kind of like a gossip and he just likes to talk about himself and his friends. And when Richard realizes that his friends have a darker layer that they haven't been revealing to him and that he didn't expect, it completely shatters his perspective of them. That's the who's flying the plane scene for those in the know. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I thought it was so well done, and yeah, there's just so much to unpack in the story. It's definitely a classic for a reason and also very popular for a reason. I honestly would love if they did make a more faithful like miniseries or like movie adaptation of this, but as it stands right now, it is a really amazing book. Now we are going to be moving into my 4.5 books for the last month. The first one we're going to be talking about is the second volume of The Grandmaster Demonic Cultivation by MXTX. This book starts exactly where the first book left off, with Wei Wuxian and Lan Wangji traveling across the land trying to find the body parts of this cursed corpse who they think is being controlled by a mysterious villain. This volume contains the Yi City arc, which is the backstory of Zhuge Yang, Zhao Jingchen, and Ah Qing, as well as some flashbacks to the Sunshot campaign with the origins of the relationship between Nia Mingyu, Lan Zichen, and Jing Guangyao. Overall, I really love this volume. I thought there were just so many good dramatic moments in it. I do really enjoy MXTX's writing to an extent. I find the fact that she's very straightforward a lot of the times with her themes and her characters' motivations to be really refreshing. But at the same time, I think that we do see the majority of the story through Wei Wuxian's perspective. And while he can be very observant with his analysis of some things, he can also be a kind of an unreliable narrator with others, which makes him really fun to follow. Obviously, this book kind of like lives and dies by its ships, so I'm going to be talking about that for a little while now. Talking about the main relationship between Wuxian and Wangji, I think by the end of this book, we're seeing more directly what I wanted their relationship to be. With Wei Wuxian starting to learn like how much Wangji is willing to sacrifice to help him. I thought that Zhuge Yang and Zhao Jingchen's relationship was interesting, but I'm also like fangirls who want them to end up to have a happy ever after. I'm like, fam, it is not happening. If anything, I feel like this book made me care a lot more about Song Lan and his relationship to Zhao Jingchen. They have such a deep bond that by the end of the arc, you can really feel the sadness from everything they went through. Also, no happy ending is to be had for the Sworn Brother trio either. I think it's really interesting to see Jing Chen's devotion to Jing Guangyao's honor and kind of showing that what a Lan brother devotion can look like when it's targeted at someone who's actually evil. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I can't wait to read the third volume. I might like space it out and wait until November, December to read it because I know that the fourth volume is not out yet, but I really enjoyed the story and I can't wait to see where it goes from here. The next book we're going to be talking about is Cruel and Fated Light by Ashley Shuttleworth. This is the sequel to A Dark and Hollow Star. Set pretty much after the events of the first book, the main character Arlo gets invited to spend the summer at her friend Vahan's palace. There's a lot of Fae court drama. Vahan's mom and then the patriarch of Arlo's family really hate each other. And Vahan's mom, Rahadni, she is definitely doing some shady shit, and a lot of that hinges on her breaking up the members of her son's friend group. This book is incredibly long, as you can see, it's like over 600 pages, so I'm going to set it down because it is very heavy. Because it was so long, it did take me a little while to get into the story, but I definitely enjoyed the second half a lot more than the first. I felt like I was understanding a lot more of the plot structure more and more as the book went on, which is exactly how I felt from the previous book, so I think just the author's writing style and plot structure just take a little bit of time to get into. I feel like this was mostly Celadon's book, with a little bit of Aurelian and Vahan on the side. Arlo felt somewhat disconnected since most of her chapters are separate from the boys, with her going off to have adventures with Nazca. I really liked Arlo's relationship with Luck and how her powers kind of are manifesting in a very video gamey way. The turning point for me where I was having an okay time to a really good time was there was this one reveal that when I realized what they were going for, I was like, oh my gosh, I am all fucking in. This is so funny and juicy as a plot point. There's just gonna be so much drama and I am absolutely here for it. I also don't want to spoil the ending, but I really think the first book was set up, and this is the tipping point, and then the third book hopefully will be really crazy and action-packed. Talking about overall themes for this book, I think the biggest ones are about acceptance and the value of both the birth family and chosen family. Part of that comes from Arlo and her relationship with her mother and kind of seeking validation from others and kind of using Vahan's mom, Rahadni, as kind of a surrogate mother. There's also Celadon and his family background and how Arlo is the only one who sees him for who he is and not what he's been made to be. The other major theme is allowing oneself to love again after loss. This is showcased with Aurelian deciding he's going to pursue Vahan after being previously closed off from him. And then also Nazca falling for Arlo after she's been trying to push everyone away after the death of her sister. Overall, I like this book a lot more than the first one, which is why I'm rating it higher than that. I felt like the action and big reveals were better spaced out and gave the book more momentum. And the way this one ended, oh crap, I cannot wait to see what they're going to do for the next book. The next book we're going to be talking about is Her Body and Other Parties by Carmen Maria Machado. I do still have my physical copy, but I lent it to a friend, so we're just going to have the stand-in image here for right now. I rated this book 4 stars. And I rated this book 4 stars. This book is a short story collection of feminist and queer-oriented stories that are also told through a horror lens. I think overall I like the first half of stories more than the second. The first half I felt like I could relate and connect to these stories a little bit more, whereas some of the second half I was like, I don't know what's going on, and other ones I was like, I see what's going on, but it's not really doing anything for me personally. I really enjoyed the first story, which was The Husband Stitch, which is the one that's based on the Green Ribbon. It really hits it out of the park in terms of themes and expanding on the original source material in an interesting and meaningful way, talking about the conflict between male sexual desire and female autonomy. I also enjoyed Especially Heinous, which is the story that is basically recaps of Law & Order SBU episodes, but then it takes a hard left turn into basically becoming episodes of The X-Files, but a little bit more funny than scary. Which I think is part of the point, because it's a critique on how some long-running shows will get so convoluted and divert down really strange pathways when they're in their 8th season. Obviously I enjoyed this book enough that I'm lending out to other friends, and I definitely think it was a good thing for me to pick up. I definitely want to keep it on my shelves in the future and kind of just pick out different short stories that I want to read as I see fit. The next book we're going to be talking about is The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea by Axie O. This story follows our main character Mina, who sacrifices herself to become the bride of the sea god in a yearly ritual to quell these storms and allow her village to continue to flourish. This ritual involves throwing young women into the ocean to apparently drown, but in fact, Mina is transported into the spirit world where she meets the members of the Lotus House who are defending the sea god from outside threats. With their begrudging help, Mina works on a plan to appease him as well as find a way to return home. This book has been described as having very heavy Spirited Away vibes, and I do think that is very true. This book also feels a little bit on the lower YA side. I don't think it's something that will stick with me in the long run, but I did find it to be whimsical, fun, and well-paced while I was reading it. The romance is also very cute and well-developed, although I do have the same relation to the romance. I got interested in this book because I heard someone say that this has the trope of human girl and ancient hundreds-year-old guy, and they were saying that in a derogatory way, but I was like, I'm looking. Respectfully. I personally love that trope, and it's in here, but it's just so tame that if you're looking for something with a little more meat, something a little bit more, this is so inoffensive that I cannot believe people will get mad at it. The next book we're going to be talking about is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is a retelling of the Edgar Allan Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher, where our main character Alex goes at the behest of their childhood friend to join them at their decrepit family home. Once they get there, they realize that the blighted landscape has transformed the flora and fauna for the worst, and it's also contributing to a mysterious illness that the Usher siblings are suffering from. This book is more novella length, it's only 150 pages, and because of that, it feels like there's not a lot of depth there. It is creepy, and there was one scene where I was like, oh, I don't like this. It's a possession story, but not in a traditional possession story sense. And while I did like the twist, I'm a defender of said item that causes a possession, and I was like, no, they would never do this. This is propaganda. Also, it felt like with the climax, basically they make the decision of what they have to do, and then it cuts to like the decision having already been done and then dealing with the aftermath. And I was like, no, why cut away? I want to see that on the page. I want to have all of those emotions and details of the plot. I also want to say that the author's note spoiled the twist in Mexican Gothic, so fair warning if you haven't read that book, do not read the author's note of this. And speaking of Mexican Gothic, we are now going to be talking about the worst book I read this last month, which was Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. I rated this book 3 stars, so objectively not very low. I had a pretty good reading month and I did enjoy pretty much everything I read. This just happens to be the book that I felt was the least strong of the ones I read this last month. This book follows the main character, Noemi, who gets this alarming letter from her cousin who thinks that her husband's new family is trying to kill her. And then Noemi decides to go and investigate. The family is super uptight, very strict and rude to her, and basically are trying to make her and her cousin think that they're crazy for thinking badly of them. But obviously, they're doing some pretty shady shit. Overall, this book was very boring and not scary to me. And I deem something scary if, like, I have a dream about it, and I did not have any dreams about this book. Another thing I think kind of hindered my reading experience of this was that I really didn't like the audiobook. The narrator was just so flat and had like no emotion or variation in her tone. It did get a little bit more exciting and fast-paced towards the end, but that was like the last 20% of the book. I do think it's a very classic Gothic structure, which I think now I just need to realize that Gothic is probably not my genre. I keep trying to get into it and it just keeps letting me down. I do think this book is trying to say something about colonialism and kind of uses a metaphor to show the parasitic relationship between white colonizers coming in and taking over native land. But I also think that just because it has a message doesn't mean that the rest of the book was good, which is really what I was trying to get at with Notes on an Execution last month. I feel like sometimes I'll read a book that is so hollow, and then when I read a book that has like any amount of substance whatsoever, I'm like, oh, I have to give it a high score because of that. But I think this is fine just being a 3 for me. It's very take it or leave it in my opinion. And that's just how I felt. I definitely think I'm in the minority. I know a lot of people say this is like their favorite horror novel of all time. So just because it didn't work for me doesn't mean it's not going to work for you. So those are all the books I ended up reading this last month. I'm glad that I was able to start the fall season off right by reading just a lot of books that I really enjoyed. And I'm hoping to continue that trend for the rest of the year and read as much as I can. Especially now that I've successfully proved to myself that I can read a lot of books and do grad school pretty simultaneously. And I look forward to continue to tell you about the books that I'm reading for the rest of the year. But that is it for me today. I hope you guys all have a wonderful day. Please like this video or consider subscribing if you aren't already. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye!